9 Jewish priests and 5 red heifers. All these elements are in place for what some Jews and Gentiles believe is the key to building the third Jewish temple.
The recent Red Heifer Conference in historic Shiloh has brought attention to the long-awaited Red Heifer sacrifice, which holds significance for various religious beliefs. This ritual symbolizes the potential end of the world, the reconstruction of the Third Temple, and the arrival of the Messiah, sparking discussions about potential conflicts, health crises, and the ultimate fate of humanity. When will this ritual take place? Join us as we explore what really happened in the Red Heifer Conference and why it is important in our modern world. The fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. The ancient prophecy about the reconstruction of the Third Temple, the same temple that is associated with wars and end times, and many prophecies in the Bible are about to be fulfilled. In fact, all the resources needed are ready, and what's left is the promised time for the Jews to begin the reconstruction. Prophecies of the Bible, predominantly in the book of Ezekiel, predict the construction of the Third Temple either before or during the coming of the Messiah. This assurance is the source of power that urges these Jews to gather the required resources to actualize the event. Atop these preparations, the acquisition of a red heifer was the most critical element. 6 years ago, there was a petition by the Jews asking that they should be allowed to artificially breed these red cows. In 2022, 5 immaculate red heifers were brought from Texas to Israel by the Temple Institute. In this foreseen ritual, the temple will be purified with the ashes of a red heifer. And what follows after the sacrifice is terrifying. What happens after the ritual? The horrifying meaning of the Red Heifer Ritual. The recent wave of interest in the apocalyptic prophecy has generated global hype around the mysterious appearance of red cows in the ancient ritual. This preoccupation with the end of the world reflects both religious ideology and human psychology, which have existed for centuries. The past 15 years have been marked by several dates that were supposed to be the beginning of the apocalypse, though none have happened. Surveys show that many Americans and Muslims are also convinced of the imminent return of important religious figures or the end of the world during their lifetimes. As early as 5,000 years ago, the 5,000-year-old Sumerian epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, encompasses tales of divine punishment and catastrophic floods, reflecting our human obsession for apocalyptic narratives. At the center of the current intrigue is a centuries-old ritual involving the erection of a sacrificial altar in Jerusalem, which is situated above the Mount of Olives. The meaning of this sacrifice ritual in the Jewish tradition is deep, but one of its meanings is that it marks the reconstruction of the Third Temple in Jerusalem, which is also a sign of the coming of the Messiah. However, the proposed location for the Third Temple intersects with one of the most contested and sacred sites in the world, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock Shrine, one of the most important symbols of Islam. Not only the religious dispute, but also the political time bomb is created by the demolition of these structures to make space for the temple construction. Will the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock Shrine really be brought down for the Third Temple? The controversial Red Heifer Conference. It wasn't that long ago that an important conference was held about red heifers, an event that was held in secret and organized by the Temple Institute for only Jews. The event provided information about the present status of the red heifers, including the unique opportunity to see them in Shiloh, a holy and historical place. Shiloh holds a high place in Bible history as a place where the tabernacle was located before Jerusalem became the capital of Israel. This historical background is what makes Shiloh the best place to lay the foundations for the building of the future temple. The red heifers in Shiloh do not simply present a symbol, but also serve as a practical platform for the temple service rituals. Crimson dye was another important topic discussed at the meeting, and it was used for the red heifer sacrifice. For a long time, scientists could not find the origin of this dye until they found a worm capable of producing the expected red color. This discovery is a significant step toward accomplishing the red heifer sacrifice. The event also consisted of lectures on cattle breeding in Israel, featuring the variations in breeding in the Golan Heights and Samaria. The location of the red heifer sacrifice was discussed, and it was suggested that the Mount of Olives was the site. Nevertheless, in the wake of the recent controversies and debates that have been raised about the sacrifice, the Israeli government has decided not to conduct any such event, which indicates that it will not happen during this year's Passover. However, this delay doesn't affect the planning and building of the red heifer sacrifice or the construction of the temple. Where the sacrifice will occur is unclear at present. Whether it is going to be in Jerusalem or Shiloh is not known. Overall, the conference reaffirmed the wider objective of reconstructing the temple in Jerusalem and what needed to be done to achieve this objective. The sacred manual for the ancient ritual. The laws for the offering of the red heifer, as written in Numbers chapter 19, describe a detailed procedure in which certain rules and rites need to be followed. The children of Israel were also ordered to acquire a red heifer with no spot or blemish, which had never been put to yoke. This heifer was finally sacrificed and burned outside the camp. While the fire was burning, the cedar wood, oregano, and scarlet-dyed wool or yarn were added to the fire. The residual ash was collected and put into a vessel which contained spring water. This mixture of the ashes and water was then used to purify the people who had become ritually unclean because they had gotten in touch with a corpse. The water was thrown on the person for the 3rd and 7th day cleanliness process using a bunch of hyssop and oregano. The priest himself was considered ritually impure by the performance of this rite and had to be purified in living waters before the evening of the same day. The Mishnah, the primary collection of the oral Torah in Rabbinic Judaism, includes a section on the red heifer that bears the name Tractate Parah in Seder Tahorot. This tract offers a thorough coverage of the rituals of red heifer sacrifice, highlighting the involved procedures as well as requirements and specifications. The Mishnah Parah says that if 2 black hairs are found in the red heifer sacrifice, it will be invalid apart from the other requirements of an unblemished animal for sacrifice. In addition, there are some other specifications. They include natural birth in the cesarean section, which disqualifies the heifer. The water of this ritual must be living, meaning spring water, which is a more stringent requirement than for a ritual bath mikveh. One of the most important things is to make sure that those who were involved, including children born and raised in isolation from any kind of contact with a corpse, were completely purified for the ritual. Different means were used to avoid any pollution, including a causeway from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives to ensure that the heifer and accompanying priests did not pass by a grave. The ceremony of burning the red heifer was conducted on the Mount of Olives, where a ritually pure Kohen slaughtered the heifer and then sprinkled its blood in the direction of the temple 7 times. The heifer was next torched on a pyre together with red-dyed wool, hyssop, and cedar wood. Even though this sacrifice is to be carried out by Jews, its instructions are still written in the Bible. How does this practice cut across different religions, traditional ancient rituals, and modern-day Christianity? The biblical significance of a red heifer lies in the Old Testament law and prophecy, being most prominent in the purification rituals described in Numbers 19. It was stated by this law that the ashes of a red heifer were needed to purify the Israelites from uncleanness, especially in cases of contact with death. This purification was mandatory for engaging in temple rituals and to maintain sacred cleanliness. Traditionally, the rabbis believed that only 9 red heifers have been sacrificed since the days of Moses. Since the destruction of the Second Temple, no red heifers have been sacrificed. The arrival of 5 unblemished red heifers from Texas to Israel on September 20th, 2022, according to the Temple Institute, is viewed by many as a significant event, as it could be interpreted as the fulfillment of prophecy and be the precursor to the construction of the Third Temple. The requirements for a red heifer were stringent. It had to be pristine and had never been a beast of burden. Its sacrifice involved uniqueness, like being performed by a female animal away from the entrance to the tabernacle and with the requirement of its color. The ritual in which Eleazar the priest presided was the slaughtering of the red heifer at the outskirts of the Israelite camp. The blood of the heifer was next scattered towards the front of the tabernacle, and the carcass was burned with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool. The ashes were gathered and stored in a clean area that was not close to the camp for use in purification rites. The red heifer regulations act as a prediction of the sacrifice of Christ on behalf of the sins of the believers. Jesus, like the red heifer, was flawless and was sacrificed outside the city. Just like the ashes of the red heifer have the power to purify from the contamination of death, the sacrifice of Christ rids believers of the curse and the corruption of sin. The Red Heifer Ritual was originally put forth in Mosaic law and later evolved to include more standards and criteria in Judaism. The tradition of the Talmud includes such details as what kind of rope should be used for binding a heifer, which direction it should be slaughtered from, what words the priest should speak, and even the wearing of sandals during the ritual. According to rabbinical laws, many things disqualify a red heifer from being used in the purification ceremony. For example, it may be disqualified if it has been ridden or leaned on, if a bird has rested on it, or if it has 2 black or white hairs. In the futurist perspective of eschatology, the erection of a third temple in Jerusalem is predicted. Jesus himself prophesied about the desecration of the temple during the tribulation period, which shows that there has to be a temple. If the participants in the dedication of the end times temple adhere to Jewish law, the ashes of a red heifer, which are mixed with water, will be required for the purification rites. As a matter of fact, the finding of a blemish-free red heifer in Israel could be viewed as the beginning of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Nevertheless, Christians believe the presence of a red heifer is not a prerequisite for the occurrence of the rapture. In the same way, those who advocate for the rebuilding of the temple may need a red heifer only for ceremonial purposes, while the animal sacrifices are not needed anymore, as the requirements of the law are already fulfilled by Jesus' sacrifice. Scripture compares the red heifer ceremony with the sacrifice of Christ to show the superiority of Christ's sacrifice in the cleansing of our conscience from sin. The value of red heifers in Israel for the Orthodox Jews and some followers of Christianity is deep. For Orthodox Jews, red heifers are crucial for the restoration of Old Testament sacrifices and Third Temple construction. For some Christians, the red heifer's unblemished appearance is a sign of the end times and the fulfillment of biblical prophecies about Christ's return and the end of the age. The Bible provides detailed instructions regarding the red heifer ritual in Numbers 19:1-10. As per these commands, a red heifer that is immaculate, blemish-free, and has never been yoked before was to be brought by the Israelites. The priest, Eleazar, was to take this heifer to the outside of the camp, where it would be slaughtered. He would then splash some of its blood 7 times toward the front of the tent at the meeting. Thus, the whole red heifer with its dung would be burned, and cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet yarn would be added to the fire. After that, Eleazar and the one who burned the heifer were to wash themselves and their clothes, remaining unclean until evening. The ashes of the red heifer were to be collected, and these were kept in a clean place outside the camp for use in the rites of purification. Why don't the Jews have the same perspectives about this sacrifice as Christians? The ideologies of Judaism versus other religions. In Judaism, the ashes of the red heifer, called para aduma, were used for the rituals of purification. The ashes were combined with clean running water, and the mixture was sprinkled on people who became impure by touching the dead bodies. The process of purification was an important aspect of spiritual cleansing, especially for those who intended to enter the temple. Today, Orthodox Jews continue to observe the washing rite with the verses from the book of Numbers read on the Sabbath of the red heifer, which happens on the last Shabbat of the month of Adar, just before Passover. The importance of the red heifer in Jewish ritual is not limited to the performance of rituals. For Christians, the advent of a rabbi-approved red heifer in Jerusalem signifies the coming of rapture and the construction of a third temple during the end times. This belief is based upon the expectation that the fulfillment of the Bible prophecies will come after the reconstruction of the temple. For Jewish followers, however, the coming of the red heifer shows that the Messiah will soon appear and the temple will be rebuilt. The 10th perfect red heifer was only going to be found and sacrificed by the Jewish scholar Maimonides when the Messiah was ready to appear. Observant Jews anticipate the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 25 and 26, which they understand as being washed by God and given a new heart and spirit. This revival is regarded as part of the Jewish theme of redemption, which is very essential during the Passover. The red heifer, in both Jewish and Christian eschatology, represents purity, newness, and the fulfillment of the prophecies. Its role is not limited to the sacramental level, but also covers broader theological and prophetic issues of more than these two religions, as it also was in Islam and specifically was written in the Quran. What does the Quran say about the red heifers? The Quran describes the red cow, drawing from various sources, including biblical and rabbinic texts. Some of these sources seem to date back to the Quran's time, while others appear to have come later. Although it's less likely that later rabbinic sources were influenced by the Quran, they may have existed in oral traditions during the 7th century. However, the Quran's context differs significantly from biblical and rabbinic traditions. While those traditions view the red cow in the context of purity rituals, the Quran presents it in the context of resurrection. The Quran's narrative about the cow shares similarities with the red cow in Numbers 19 and the cow whose neck is broken in Deuteronomy 21, verse 1-9. Midrash Tanhuma also discusses these together, along with the red cow's connection to the golden calf, mentioned before and after the cow narrative in the Quran. In Deuteronomy 21, verse 1-9, the term eglah is used for the atonement of an unsolved murder, possibly referenced in the Quran. However, while Deuteronomy's narrative focuses on a ritual for atoning an unsolved murder, the Quran's narrative is less specific. In the Quran, it is written that Allah instructed Musa's people, the Israelites, to sacrifice a cow with a particular set of features through Musa, and when the prophet told his people, they were shocked by the kind of cow that they were instructed to give as an offering, so they requested that Musa confirm the details from the Almighty. Musa, in disbelief at his people's request, reminded them of Allah's greatness and how their protector was free from corruption and unawareness. However, they were still hesitant because the instructions from Allah were still puzzling to them. They were told to sacrifice a cow that was neither very old nor very young, but the right age, that the cow must be yellow, intriguing enough to catch the heart of everyone who looked at it, and that the cow should be discharged, not used to farm or for irrigation, and with no defect. These requirements were challenging, but eventually they found the right cow that met all the needed requirements and promptly sacrificed the cow as Allah had instructed. The Quran uses the term al-haq to describe the cow, which might mean statute rather than truth, aligning with rabbinic interpretations. The Quran also uses the term tasuru, meaning pleasing, but it could also mean ascertained or authenticated by onlookers, similar to rabbinic rulings regarding the cow's color. Although the red cow ritual was likely no longer performed during the time of the Quran, rabbinic discussions about it continued in the Talmud. The Quran engages with these discussions, indicating its awareness of rabbinic literature, even though the ritual was no longer practiced. Talking about the place where the red heifer will be sacrificed, let's know more about Shiloh itself and the story behind it. The holy grounds of Shiloh. Several are familiar with the two temples that were on Mount Moriah, the first of which was built by King Solomon and the second by Herod. Nevertheless, Shiloh, which is a small town in Samaria, is usually regarded as insignificant. For 369 years, Shiloh brought to life the role of the national religious center of the Jewish people during the period of the biblical judges, when the glory of the Jerusalem temple was yet to come. Shiloh's standout role is shown by the law prohibiting the setting up of places of sacrifice elsewhere during the time it served as the national temple. It was only during the times of the tabernacle in the desert and the temples in Jerusalem that such exclusions were temporarily allowed. This implies that Shiloh is unique in the eyes of the people because it is the center of worship. Data shows Shiloh as a turning point in Israel's history. It was a gathering point for the most significant events, such as the distribution of land and the choice of cities for Levites. Furthermore, it was from Shiloh that the tribes of Gad and Reuben departed for their respective territories. Eli, the high priest, a venerated man, directed religious affairs in Shiloh. Pilgrims from far and wide traveled to Shiloh, and they were attracted by its sacredness. There, the famous prayer of Hannah, who was begging God for a child, was heard throughout the sanctuary, a prayer that was answered with the birth of the prophet Samuel, who was brought up in the care of the priest Eli. The key role of the Shiloh temple was demonstrated in major confrontations, particularly during the battles against the Philistines. The plunder of the Ark of the Covenant by the Philistines was a startling new development, showing a withdrawal of providence from Shiloh. The failure of the temple did not separate the town from the main historical events. Prophet Achiah of Shiloh had already prophesied about the division of Solomon's kingdom, while Jeremiah lamented its destiny and its idolatry, which was wideness. The future of the temple is a matter of discussion, as various people have different opinions on its destruction. Some state that the temple was actually taken down, not demolished. Others say that it was a result of an attack and evacuation. The Shiloh fire could probably have been the cause of its being plundered. Jeremiah's prophecy about the gloomy future of Shiloh represents a chapter in its history that shows the impact of transgressing God's laws. The Psalms also speak of the spoiling of Shiloh with the sword, fire, and desolation. The Bible depicts neither the fall of Shiloh's specific narration nor the old times of the Israelites, which has, however, become an illustration of the early period of their events. The holiness of Shiloh was eternal. Its sanctity was enshrined in the Talmudic books and in the hearts of the people who worshipped its sacred sites. Shiloh and its temple's fate is a mystery that requires a thorough analysis of historical and biblical facts. Although there are no direct illustrations of this destruction, these little differences at least do justice to its value and the end of it. Contrary to the enduring temples in Jerusalem, Shiloh was a tabernacle, a temporary shelter for the Ark of the Covenant. On the other hand, the destruction of Shiloh's temple stands for the opposite of the persistence of Jerusalem's temples. Consequently, its ultimate demolition becomes an undeniable fact. Shiloh's primary meaning was that the Ark of the Covenant was there, and this made it a sacred place. The capture of the Ark led to the temple losing its former glory, and because of that, it was no longer used. Although there are some differences of opinion about Shiloh's destiny, the evidence seems to be that it is a slow downfall rather than sudden doom. Shiloh's temple had lost its significance and could not be used when the Philistines took possession of the Ark, which eventually became the turning point in the history of Shiloh. While the temple itself was not demolished, the attendant irrelevance would have likely been the main reason for its subsequent desertion. Besides the lack of biblical text that specifically narrates Shiloh's failure, the prerequisite of failure seems evident. On the contrary, the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem did not result in general sadness, indicating that its end was temporary. The present-day Shiloh archaeological excavations exhibit their past eminence through physical evidence. The finds in the excavation of the site and the remains of the ruined temple bring the story of this historical monument to life, thus adding to our biblical narratives. Nowadays, Shiloh symbolizes Jewish history, and old synagogue ruins are evidence of centuries of Jewish spiritual and cultural experience. Thanks for watching. Let us know your thoughts on this in the comments section below. Remember to like this video, share, and subscribe for more enlightening videos. See you next time.